On the one hand, Doris Day looks stunning in the fashion show. On the other, it's not a good episode, and I will give specific examples for why that's the case. So there will be discussion. And this is the seventh episode of the third season of the Doris Day Show. And when I realised what this was about, part of me thought, are we really doing this again? Because in the previous season, I believe, Doris modelled in this fashion show. And once again, the fashion designer is back in the area and he wants Doris to be his sole model, which on the one hand I really liked because it meant we got to see Doris on screen pretty much constantly and in some very interesting costumes. However, the pacing is absolutely terrible. As much as I love to look at Doris Day, over 4 minutes of this was just her walking up and down the catwalk in a very interesting array of outfits. But that's a long time. That's 1/5 roughly of this episode of just Doris walking up and down to music, nothing else, absolutely nothing else whatsoever. To the point where I did actually time it, and it was just under 5 minutes of that. No dialogue, no progression in the narrative, and it kind of wore a bit thin very quickly. As I said, I love looking at Doris Day, but in terms of the actual story, it was completely unnecessary. And then it pulls away from that, and we get a tiny bit of narrative development, but it still keeps cutting back to Doris walking up and down. Now, if I wasn't in love with Doris Day and didn't absolutely take every opportunity to look at her, then that would get very, very boring very quickly. Granted, if you don't love Doris Day, you're probably not going to be watching the Doris Day Show. But nevertheless, I'd say about 7 minutes of this in total is Doris just walking up and down, displaying these various garments. And that's a large chunk of a 20 something minute episode. And the actual events that do happen around that are not as dramatic as they could have been. I know I said spoilers, I don't want to give it away completely, but basically somebody comes to the fashion show who shouldn't be there and they're going to cause some problems. That sounds like it could be really chaotic and dramatic, and it kind of just fizzes away in the background with full focus on Doris in the foreground. Again, and I'll keep saying this, I love her and I did enjoy watching her on the catwalk, but that would have been better as a DVD extra, where we got to see it in full and they edited it much more quickly in the actual episode. That would have been really great. I say that it could be also on the DVD extras. I don't watch the extras until I finish watching that season, just in case there are, spoilers or anything. But the point there is that I enjoyed it on its own, but within the context of the narrative, it just wasn't well written, the pacing was terrible, the story wasn't even that interesting around about that. So, honestly, it's not a great episode. Plus, it doesn't feel that different to the previous fashion show episode, and that one was much better written. There was a much stronger sense of anticipation and unpredictability, and I don't want to say exactly what happens in that episode in case you haven't seen it, but it very much involves Doris and some other models trying to work out what on earth is going to happen because there are various problems. This one just isn't great. Doris looked gorgeous. The costumes were certainly, for the most part, quite fascinating, but the pacing, the editing, and the narrative itself just weren't very good at all.